This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Sure.
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? It's the Week 10 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. Ask me any questions on there. If you have any questions about your starting lineup or who I should pick up, or I have a horrible injury problem in Week 10, help me out. I will do my best to guide you through this. But we're pretty much towards the end of the fantasy regular season. Usually it ends around week 13. Some crazy people go to week 14, and some people will actually end in week 12, so you can have a longer playoff. But week 13 is generally the time that most regular seasons end, and it starts the playoffs. And we have this 4-game stretch now where you're either already out, or like a lot of people, there's a big cluster right in the middle of most leagues where a lot of people are 5-5 or 4-6, and these next 4 weeks could really change the outcome of fantasy seasons. And the biggest way that you can really make a change right now, you're probably not going to be able to make a trade because most teams are established, and the only way you're going to get anybody is by giving up a ton of players on your team. So really, the only way that you could improve your team at this point is going out in the waiver wire and trying to get some lottery picks, which if you're looking for a Hail Mary, it may not be the worst option. Now, you may have some of those established players on your team who you hold on to them because they've done so well in the past, but maybe this season they just haven't done so well. It might be time to look at players who are actually producing. I know on teams that I've had, I have established wide receivers like Demaryius Thomas and Brandon Marshall and even Golden Tate before Golden Tate started doing well again. And I went out and I picked up Jamison Crowder, and I had Terrell Pryor, who I drafted late in draft. And I still wasn't starting those guys just because, out of principle, really, that I figured that, maybe this is the week that my wide receivers are going to turn it around. It's time to pretty much toss up anything you can do and try to stick it at the wall. And that's, if you're trying to make it into the fantasy playoffs, that's what you got to do. Now I'm gonna highlight a couple people that might be out on the waiver wires who could possibly help you get in, or if you are one of those established teams who's number 1 and number 2 in the league, if you go out and pick up these teams, you might set your team up for the rest of the season and your run into the playoffs. The first guy I want to highlight is Robert Kelly, the running back from Washington Redskins. Right now it's looking like Matt Jones. He's getting healthier, but I think because they're not really sure how healthy he's going to be, Robert Kelly is going to be the starter for right now. And he may not be that bad to keep on your team, just in case Matt Jones does get hurt again. Another guy, DeJuan Harris in San Francisco, another running back. Carlos Hyde, we're not sure if he's going to sit out week 10. And if Hyde is in, he's going to get the bulk of the carries, and he is the better running back. And I'm not too crazy about DeJuan Harris, but it's a name you might want to know. In Tampa Bay, it seems like all their running backs are getting hurt, and their main running back right now is Peyton Barber. So it's another guy that you might want to have on the radar, and you might want to take a look at on the waiver wire. The running back situation in Denver, C.J. Anderson is hurt, and he's likely done for the rest of the fantasy season at least. So Devontae Booker is going to be the guy who he's the main guy right now, but there is another guy on their team that they've said might be getting some looks, and that's Capri Bibbs. Booker's going to get the majority of the carries, and he's probably even going to be there on passing downs. But if anything were to happen to Devontae Booker, let's say if you are a team who's relying on Devontae Booker at this point, you may want to look at maybe going out and picking up Bibbs and really as a handcuff, because you don't want to lose Booker and then just be stuck with no running back. Rashard Matthews from the Tennessee Titans, it was one game, he had a ton of targets, and if Marcus Mariota does have some sort of connection with Rashard Matthews, that may be good. So if you're looking for wide receiver help, Rashard Matthews might be an interesting pickup. Some guys who have been injured who are coming back, you're going to want to keep in mind of. From the Green Bay Packers, James Starks. He's probably not going to play this week, but he is getting healthier. And when he comes back, he's going to be the running back. And right now they're doing it with the wide receiver Ty Montgomery and Don Jackson. But I think once Starks gets back, he's not an all-star running back, but he is good enough to be the number one guy there. So, if he's sitting on your waiver wire, you may want to think about maybe trying to pick him up. Dion Lewis from the New England Patriots. Even though the Patriots are doing so well with Tom Brady and LeGarrette Blount and James White, if Dion Lewis can come back and, if he is better than James White, if he's completely healthy, Dion Lewis may get a shot. Now, you got to be careful with this one because it's the Patriots and it's Bill Belichick. And one thing that my brother always says, and he's said it many times on this podcast, is that Bill Belichick hates you. So if Dion Lewis does come back, there really is no guarantee that he's going to be the starter, that they're going to immediately give him the ball. I mean, they've done so well so far. Why mess it up? So it's going to be tough. I know for me, I have Dion Lewis in my main league, but I had him as a keeper. I drafted him because I knew that I was gonna keep him for next year. And it is a risk because it's the Patriots, but I think Dion Lewis, because of what he did last year, and you saw what he could do, the possibility is there. And if I have to give one more player to keep an eye on, I'd probably go with Ronnie Hillman, who, he's the running back who used to be in Denver, and he was always the up-and-comer. But now he looks like he has another chance in Minnesota where, Adrian Peterson, I don't think he's going to come back this season. And if he does, it's not going to be in time for fantasy-wise. So you got Jared McKinnon and Matt Asiata, who they really aren't doing a whole lot. Matt Asiata is probably he's the guy who's going to punch it in on the goal line. Jerick McKinnon is more of the game changer, but Ronnie Hillman really is. He hasn't gotten a ton of snaps, but there's the possibility that they give him more snaps going forward. The Vikings are struggling. They just fired their offensive coordinator, so maybe they see something in Ronnie Hillman. So that's another guy you want to keep on your radar. Maybe if you have an open spot on your roster, pick up Ronnie Hillman, and then you might just end up with a running back too, or maybe a flex option. So let's dive into the matchups this week. Thursday Night Football was a horrible game. I mean, if you tuned in to see the Baltimore Ravens against the Cleveland Browns, you're a sick person. I mean, you must obviously love football because these are two really bad teams. The Cleveland Browns, they may actually challenge the Detroit Lions to be the second 0-16 team in the NFL. Now, they just can't figure it out, and I think Ravens were probably the last chance for them to get a win here. They have a tough schedule going up. So the Ravens beat them 28-7. Joe Flacco, at best, he's a backup quarterback for fantasies. And on the Browns, the only player that you really want on your team, and I'm not even sure if you're starting him every week, that's Sherrell Pryor. Back on the Ravens, you can make an argument for Terrence West and Steve Smith, and Brashad Perriman had a decent game, but these are guys that I don't want to start every single week. These are guys who, when you have the bye week, that you're looking to fill in somewhere, and put in Brashad Perriman at a flex because you have nobody else. But more than likely, you're not really starting any Ravens or Browns. But the rest of the matchups, let's start out with the 1 o'clock games. You got the Green Bay Packers going to the Tennessee Titans. Aaron Rodgers he's still not Aaron Rodgers. And going up against the Titans, I think it's going to be a tough matchup. And Aaron Rodgers still a top 10 quarterback, even though he isn't doing as good as he's been. But Aaron Rodgers, you're going to start him. Ty Montgomery and Don Jackson, we talked about the running back situation in Green Bay a little bit. And Ty Montgomery really is the only guy. If you're going to start one of them, Ty Montgomery is who you do it. Don Jackson, even though they say that they want to get him more involved, he just hasn't really been doing anything. So I'd probably leave him on the bench. I'm not even sure if I'm picking him up in most leagues, just because James Starks might be coming back pretty soon. Jordy Nelson is obviously the number one wide receiver there. You're going to start him no matter what. And then the wide receivers after that, it's kind of up in the air. You got Randall Cobb, who is dealing with an injury. He's questionable right now. I think I think he might play, but you're gonna want to watch on Sunday. He's one guy that may just end up being a scratch at the last hour. So Devontae Adams would probably be the guy who picked up the slack there. And really, both of those guys are pretty low end flex plays for me, because there's a high risk that neither of them get anything, but there is also the possibility that they get, a touchdown, and that may be the difference in your fantasy game. On the other side, with the Tennessee Titans, Marcus Mariota has actually been pretty solid after the first 4 weeks of the season. He's had at least 2 touchdowns in every game, and he's kind of minimized his turnovers. So Marcus Mariota, he's right on the verge of being a starting fantasy quarterback. If he has a couple more games of being consistent, getting 2-3 touchdowns, not having turnovers, Marcus Mariota might be a top 10 quarterback by the end of this season. But right now, unless you have bad options all around on the rest of your team, you're probably not starting him. I put him right around the top, like at the end of the top 10, somewhere in the top 10, top 15. The running back, DeMarco Murray, he should have a better game this day against the Green Bay Packers. Playing at home, I think he should be able to run it pretty well against the Green Bay Packers. And then the wide receiver situation, Marcus Mariota has been spreading the ball around pretty well. So you have the main 2 guys. You got Rashard Matthews and Tajay Sharp. And I think those are the 2 that if you want to start either of them, that you'd probably put them in your flex play, but I don't really like them. Rashard Matthews, just because he had the big game, and Tajay Sharp, he had a lot of hype coming in, but he's kind of fallen off the map. So I don't really like either of those guys. The only guy that I really like catching the ball on the Titans is Delanie Walker, and he should still be a part of this offense, and he should be good to start this game. The next matchup I got for you is the Minnesota Vikings at the Washington Redskins. Sam Bradford for the Vikings hasn't been looking good the last couple of weeks. They just came off a loss against the Lions, and I'm not sure if you can blame it on him. You might want to blame that one on their field goal kicker, Blair Walsh. But Sam Bradford, a game manager, not a starter in fantasy, so I'd leave him on your bench. The running back situation, Jerick McKinnon, Matt Asiata, Ronnie Hillman, none of them are really doing a ton right now. If I had to point one of them out, I'd probably go with Matt Asiata, only really as a flex play and only if you're desperate to start a running back here. But I would, if I had the choice, I'd probably leave all those guys on my bench. I did talk about Ronnie Hillman, but more as a safety. You put him on your roster, and maybe he pans out. I do like the wide receivers, Stephon Diggs, even though it's kind of inconceivable how he's been doing it with Sam Bradford throwing him the ball. But he has been a pretty reliable fantasy wide receiver this season. So I think you roll with him, and he could be a decent starter. And you saw with the new offensive coordinator, Cordell Patterson actually got a ton of looks last week against the Lions. And I'm not sure if he's going to be more involved in the offense, but he might play himself. He might get enough targets to play himself into flex conversation. So it's another guy you may want to keep an eye on the rest of the season. And then the guy who came out of nowhere, Adam Thielen, I think I'm not starting him, but he's somebody that also you want to put on your bench just in case you have an issue at wide receiver. On the other side with the Washington Redskins, you got Kirk Cousins, and I think he's one of those quarterbacks. He's going to be right on the edge of the top 10. And he does have a tough matchup going up against the Minnesota Vikings. You saw what Matthew Stafford was able to do against the Vikings. He didn't have a great day. They pulled out the win, but I don't think the Redskins are a little bit better on offense, but I'm not sure how good Kirk Cousins is going to do against a really good Vikings defense. The running back situation, we talked about a little bit. Matt Jones, going to be a game time decision. He has been working his way back, and he may actually end up being a healthy scratch this week because they need help on special teams. So they've already came out and said that Robert Kelly is going to be the starter, regardless if Matt Jones is able to make it into this game, which is one reason why I think Matt Jones may just end up being a scratch this week. So I would go forward thinking that Robert Kelly, he's going to be the number one guy there this week. And, again, it's a tough matchup. It's a tough defense. And, I actually like Chris Thompson a little bit better as a pass-catching running back more in PPR leagues, but I think he may get enough work where he actually is valuable in both types of leagues. The wide receiver situation, I think Jameson Crowder right now, he is the number one guy. He's the guy who's getting the majority of the targets, and I think he's a really good start. And what's helping him this week is that Deshaun Jackson is looking like he's going to be doubtful, and he probably is not going to play this week. So Jameson Crowder going to be the number one guy. Pierre Garçon will give him some relief, but I don't like Pierre Garçon to start him. And they also have their big tight end, Jordan Reed. He's back from his concussion. He had a pretty solid week, their last game. And Jordan Reed going to be a good starter this week as well. Going on to probably the hottest team outside of the Patriots in the NFL is the Atlanta Falcons at the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll keep saying it, and I've said it pretty much every single week. Matt Ryan, even though it makes absolutely no sense as to how he turned it on this season, but he has. Matt Ryan, start him. He's been the best fantasy quarterback outside of maybe Drew Brees and Tom Brady for the games that he's been back. So Matt Ryan you start him. Even the Eagles, they've fallen off the map after their hot start as well. And Devontae Freeman, no Tevin Coleman, so Devontae Freeman gonna have the full body of work for the Falcons. I like him as a start. And Julio Jones. These are the three main pillars of this team, and you should feel comfortable starting all three of these guys and assume that they're gonna give you what they're projected to get, and maybe even over, going up against an Eagles defense that's struggled at times. The only other guy who I like on that Falcons team would be Mohamed Sanu. Every now and then you'll see a random guy get a touchdown, and I wouldn't worry yourselves with those guys. Mohamed Sanu is probably the only other target who's gonna do something on this Falcons team aside from Julio Jones, but I'm not starting him this week. And going on to the other side of the ball with the Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz he's dropped as fast as he went up, because in the beginning of the season, obviously everyone was surprised that he did as well as he had, and it might have been partly the teams that he was playing, and it's also part that he's a rookie quarterback, and I think teams have figured out Carson Wentz. He's not that mobile of a quarterback. I think he's still learning on the job. So Carson Wentz probably going to struggle against the Falcons defense. So I'd probably not start him this week. And I don't really like any of the running backs. Ryan Matthews just hasn't really been super productive. He gets a touchdown here and there, but it's pointless. He gets a touchdown, but he has like 20 or 30 yards. So it's almost it's a waste to start him. And Darren Sproles, even though I think he's probably the more valuable of the running backs there, I think he's going to struggle against the Falcons. And Jordan Matthews, really the only wide receiver I like there. They got Nelson Aguilar and Josh Huff, but Jordan Matthews is the only guy week in, week out that you would consider starting him. And this is a week where, unless I have awful options at wide receiver, I'm probably going to put Jordan Matthews on the bench this week. So it's not looking good for the home team and the Philadelphia Eagles this week. Going on to the next matchup, you got the Denver Broncos going to New Orleans to take on the Saints. Trevor Siemian could have a decent game this game going up against the Saints. And the Saints, who just gave up almost 400 yards to Colin Kaepernick last week, Trevor Siemian could be in for a big day this game. So I like Trevor Siemian, and I might actually consider putting him in my top 10 because I like this matchup so much against the Saints. The running back situation, C.J. Anderson is out. We already talked about it a little bit. Devontae Booker is going to be the guy who gets the majority of those carries, and I'd put him in against the Saints, and I think he's going to probably perform like at least a top 15 running back for the week, if not a top 10 running back. And then as Trevor Siemian goes, so do the wide receivers. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, they've kind of been neck and neck. Demaryius Thomas has more touchdowns, but Emmanuel Sanders is getting the bulk of the targets. I would probably consider putting them in at wide receiver 2 or flex this game, just because going up against the Saints, it's going to be a free-for-all. So I do like the Broncos this week. And conversely, the Saints may struggle a bit going up against the Broncos, but they haven't looked as great as they did last year. So I think you still got to start Drew Brees, and you're more than likely going to have to start Mark Ingram because both of those guys are all-star. They're starting quarterbacks and running backs. The wide receivers is where it gets a little bit murky. Obviously, you'd probably go Brandon Cooks, number 1. Michael Thomas is really emerged as the number 2 guy, and then Willie Snead kind of as a 2A as the third wide receiver. But all of these guys have the potential to either blow up or absolutely do nothing. So be very careful when you are starting one of these Saints wide receivers. And it's like times in past. You never know who's going to blow up. There's been a lot of buzz about Michael Thomas, the rookie. And, this might be a game where he doesn't go off. So I'd be very careful with him. I'd probably go Cooks, Thomas, Snead as I'm ranking the Saints wide receivers. Next matchup you got some of the best teams in the league. You got the Dallas Cowboys, who are 7-1, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who really, they're on a slide, but they need to get it going here. And they got a tough matchup going up against the Dallas Cowboys. The big question for Dallas, it's the quarterback. Tony Romo is getting healthier, but Dak Prescott is leading this team to one of the best seasons that they've had in a very long time. So I predict Dak Prescott is going to be the quarterback until he really starts making mistakes, which I'm not sure if he's going to do. They're not asking a ton of him. So it's going to be a game time decision. I'd probably check on Sunday just in case somehow the owner, Jerry Jones, goes a little bit crazy and says, hey guy, you got to start Tony Romo. Dak Prescott is more than likely going to start. But I wouldn't worry too much regardless of who's the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys because Ezekiel Elliott is the best running back right now. It's between him and David Johnson, and I think you could argue that Elliott, because of the line that he's running behind, he is the better running back right now, and he's the more sure-handed running back week in, week out. So obviously you're starting Ezekiel Elliott. The wide receiver is a little bit more murkier because you're not sure what Prescott is going to do. And I thought Des Bryant was going to have a better week last week, but maybe he's just easing in. So I'd be cautious of starting either Des Bryant or Cole Beasley. But those are the two main guys that you would be looking at starting for the Cowboys. And then Jason Witten, obviously he had a big game last week. I'm not sure if you can expect that out of him every week. You're probably getting one or two of those performances a year. So I would expect Jason Witten kind of to come back to earth this game. For all those people, including the doc, who went crazy and were like, "Oh, Jason Witten, he's back. He's still an old man. He's gonna go back. They're gonna run the ball with Ezekiel Elliott, and when they're done running the ball with Ezekiel Elliott, they'll run the ball with Alfred Morris." On the other side of the ball, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, you still have, this is a very dangerous team. They didn't play very good last week against the Baltimore Ravens. And part of that might be because it was Big Ben's first game back, and they're easing him in, and he really did start picking it up in the second half. So you see they're at home, and maybe they start, opening up the offense a little bit more, because it is a very dangerous offense. So I think Big Ben, he's going to be, you're going to get a normal Big Ben day. I'm not sure if you're going to get one of those huge 400-yard, 5-touchdown games, but I think Big Ben is going to do enough to be a starter for fantasy teams. Le'Veon Bell has been disappointing some people, and obviously a tough matchup going up against the Cowboys, but you're more than likely going to have to start him. So put him in there and hope that he produces. Antonio Brown is obviously, you're starting that guy. Regardless of the team, who he's playing, he is going to be a really good option. And then the number 2 wide receiver, Eli Rogers, does look like he's healthy and he's back, and I think he's really emerged as the number 2 option. Sammy Coates and Marcus Wheaton have just kind of fallen by the wayside. Sammy Coates I like as the number 3 guy, but he's really the boomer bust. He's either going to get a long touchdown or is not going to get really anything. So Eli Rogers I do kind of like as a flex play, but going up against the Cowboys, it is going to be a tough matchup for them. Next matchup I got for you, I got the San Francisco 49ers, an in-conference rival against the Arizona Cardinals. And the 49ers they're bad. The only guy I like on that team is Carlos Hyde, and he is questionable at the moment. If he comes out and he's healthy, I do like him. I think that he might be able to do something against the Cardinals. But Colin Kaepernick, he had a big game against the New Orleans Saints, but you look at the other games that he's played, and he's been underwhelming in those. So going up against the Cardinals defense, I think he's going to go back down to earth, and you're going to see the Colin Kaepernick who wasn't able to beat out Blaine Gabbert at the beginning of the year. So I'm not starting him. If Carlos Hyde is hurt, DeJuan Harris, I don't feel too strongly about him. Maybe in a flex play, but I don't like him. I really don't want to start DeJuan Harris, only in emergency situations. And none of the wide receivers. I don't like any of them. Jeremy Curley, Torrey Smith, name them. I don't like any 49ers wide receivers. On the other side, with the Cardinals, I think this could be a good game for them. Carson Palmer trying to work his way back into being a top 10 fantasy quarterback. This might be a game to do that for him. David Johnson, as I said in the last game, he's right up there with Ezekiel Elliott as the best running backs in the league. So David Johnson is going to be a good start this game. And Larry Fitzgerald is finding the fountain of youth still. He's the number 1 wide receiver there. And I really think the number 2 wide receiver after Larry Fitzgerald has become J.J. Nelson. I think John Brown, Michael Floyd just haven't been able to produce enough. And J.J. Nelson is actually providing a spark for this team. So I like J.J. Nelson in the conversation as a flex. If you're trying to go for a sneaky play, I think he's a sleeper. But I think J.J. Nelson, John Brown, and Michael Floyd. Michael Floyd, I would just leave on your bench. John Brown only in circumstances where you have injuries and you need to just fill in a wide receiver or a flex. John Brown, and then J.J. Nelson is really the guy I'd really consider starting in flex this week. The Sunday Night Football matchup could be a preview of this year's Super Bowl. It's obviously a rematch from a Super Bowl in the past, but you got the Seattle Seahawks going to New England to take on the Patriots. One of the hottest teams taking on a team who, even though they aren't doing it on offense, they're still getting it done on defense. So with the Seattle Seahawks, Russell Wilson, obviously, he's right along with Cam Newton, has been a gigantic disappointment for a quarterback. And I don't think he's going to start, picking it up against this New England Patriots team. So Russell Wilson might struggle. I think he'll probably give you a normal day. You'll probably see more of what he's been giving you this year. So I don't expect a lot out of Russell Wilson. Christian Michael, CJ Prosise, again, because they're playing a really good Patriots defense, they're going to struggle. So Christian Michael, I don't want to start CJ Prosise. I've been seeing his name out there a lot, and he definitely deserves to be on people's radar or even on teams already, but this isn't the game to start CJ Prosise. Christian Michael will probably get enough play to be productive fantasy-wise. He's probably going to give you less than what he's projected to get you, though. Doug Baldwin, if anybody's going to catch the ball in the wide receivers, he's going to be the guy. And again, right along with Russell Wilson, Doug Baldwin has underperformed this year. So I don't expect a lot out of him this week. If I don't have to start him, I don't want to start Doug Baldwin. But I get it where if he is your number 1 or 2 guy, you put him out there, he'll probably get you, I'm guessing he's going to get you somewhere around 6 catches for 60, 70 yards. I don't expect a ton out of him this week. And then Jimmy Graham might be the one saving grace on this team. If they get down in the red zone, I think Jimmy Graham has become one of the better receiving options on this team. He's really starting to get back to the status of when he was with New Orleans. So I would start Jimmy Graham. He's definitely a top tight end. On the other side with the New England Patriots, Tom Brady, even though they are 7-1, this is going to be a tough matchup, and it will really show if the Patriots are just going to blow through this season, blow through every team and win a Super Bowl to spite Roger Goodell, or they may actually finally get challenged by a really good Seattle defense. So Tom Brady, you're going to start him regardless, but I might expect a little bit less from him this week just because going up against a really good defense. If the Seahawks are able to get up by a number of scores, I've said it before, it's the way the Patriots work. If they get up, LeGarrette Blount is going to be, you're going to get a heavy dose of him. And if he gets enough carries, he's going to be productive fantasy-wise. James White probably going to be a pretty decent option out of the backfield, but I really only like him in PPR situation at this point. Not too crazy about any of the wide receivers. I've talked about Chris Hogan and Julian Edelman, but they're just not solid enough at this point to really do anything for me. So Julian Edelman, I'd probably start him in the flex position, but I don't want to start any of those other guys. The guys you want to start on this team are Rob Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett. They're probably really the number 1 and 2 receiving options outside of James White. So Rob Gronkowski, you're starting him. He's shown that he's still one of the best, if not the best tight end in the league with Tom Brady as his quarterback. And Martellus Bennett, I've said in weeks past that you kind of have to start both of these guys. I'm going to lay off that a little bit because there's still the possibility that Martellus Bennett could go off, but more than likely Rob Gronkowski is going to get the bulk of those catches. So if you have a better option at tight end, I would probably start him over Martellus Bennett. Otherwise, put him in there and hope that maybe this is the game where Martellus Bennett goes off again. And then the last matchup of the week I got for you is the Monday Night Football, Cincinnati Bengals at the New York Giants. Cincinnati Bengals haven't really been doing a ton. Andy Dalton started hot, and he's basically cooled off. I'm not too high on him. I think he's outside of the top 10. The only way you're starting him is if you have a bye or if you have injuries or a sucky quarterback on your team. So I don't want to start Andy Dalton on my team. The running backs, Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard, it's kind of at the point where you kind of have to start both of them and hope that one of those guys go off. Jeremy Hill, he's going to be the touchdown vulture. Maybe he breaks loose for a long run as you saw in games past. But, and then Giovanni Bernard is a really good PPR option. So I think both of those guys are worthy of starting. And then AJ Green, he's another wide receiver. I thought he might have a down year this year. I was obviously wrong. I have some hate towards AJ Green for past seasons, but he's really he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. So still start AJ Green. And Tyler Eifert, he's healthy, and he immediately becomes one of the top 10 tight ends. So start Tyler Eifert. On the other side of the ball with the New York Giants, Eli Manning, he had his game last week, and he had a big game, and I think he's in the question now as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. So going up against the Bengals, it's going to be a tough matchup because the Bengals have a pretty decent defense. But if there's nobody else on your team, I think Eli Manning is a pretty decent start. Rashad Jennings, the running back, I'm not too crazy on him. I'd really only start him if you have issues at running back. Otherwise, I'd leave him on your bench. And then the wide receiver situation, Odell Beckham has really turned it around since he had those issues a couple of weeks ago. And he's, again, just like AJ Green, he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. He's proving why he was predicted as a first-round pick this year in fantasy football. So you're going to start Odell Beckham Jr. every game, and that doesn't change this week, even though you're going up against a tough Cincinnati Bengal team. And then the other wide receiver I like, Sterling Shepard, he fell off a little bit, and he was definitely the benefit of Eli Manning having his big day last week. But I think you can still expect a little bit out of him. I think he's in the flex conversation again. He's kind of fallen out of really any starting lineup. I think you put him back into flex conversation for this week. That's going to wrap it up for this week in this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. Good luck to all of you. Big thanks to the Fan Up Network for sponsoring this show. Big thanks to the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Until next week, I'm Jason Jarvi. Later, nerds.